Thank you so very much, and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's roundtable features a distinguished panel who will discuss their experiences and challenges of developing and implementing an interface to the courts for data exchange. I am Joyce Rose, your host and facilitator for today's discussion. Next slide, please. Attendees are encouraged to participate in the roundtable with questions or comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the Q&A session at the end of the discussion. However, please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those will be queued up and addressed during the Q&A session. Once today's roundtable has ended, you may submit additional questions to the email address listed or to your federal analyst.
If you have any questions, please email ccwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov.
Next slide. I want to thank our panelists from Alabama for their time and effort in preparing for this roundtable. However, today's winter storm has forced the closure of all Alabama state offices. Thus, they are not available. While they are not here in person, they did prepare written responses which my colleague, Sabira, will share with you throughout the roundtable. However, our panelists from D.C., Texas, and Utah are more than ready to begin the discussion. So let's meet them, starting with D.C. D.C., please introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Spencer Wilder. I'm the IT manager here with the District of Columbia. I've been here for about 6 years now. And Mr. Elgis, our CIO, just stepped out for a minute, but he will be joining us shortly.
Okay. How about Texas?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angie Lindeman, and I'm with Department of Family and Protective Services out of Texas. I currently serve as the IT Business Relationship Management Director for the IT division, with a focus on aligning any new IT requests with agency and business strategy and business value. And then I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Mitschke. I also work for DSPS here in Texas, and I am the Director of IT Operations over the group that does all of our interfacing.
And finally, Utah.
This is Danny Rickert. I'm a State Business Analyst with the Division of Child and Family Services. I've been here about 2 years.
My name is Joseph Listello. I'm the lead developer on the SAFE project here. I work for Department of Technology Services. I've been on the project for a little over 12 years now.
Thank you so very much. So let's move to the next slide. And today's roundtable format is really quite simple in that I will pose a series of questions related to the subtopics listed, which I then trust will give rise to an informational as well as lively discussion. Following the wrap-up portion of today's Courts Interface webinar, Terry Watt, Director, Division of State Systems, Children's Bureau, will present information regarding cost allocation. Now let's begin with question 1, which is, please describe the background and history of your data exchange, and let's start with Utah, please.
Joseph speaks.
So the background for ours was, it started altruistically. There was data in our system, in the DCFS child management system, and then in the court system, and it was kind of fortuitous. We got lucky that as we were both starting to talk about this at the same time, the courts in the state of Utah received a grant in the form of this, what's called the Court Improvement Project, and was able to partition some of that money to starting the interface. So it was kind of a luck of the draw there. That's sort of, and so to answer part of that question with did we have support from the counterpart? We did. We had support of both the full side of DCFS and the courts to start this improvement and getting data flowing between the two systems.
Great. Texas, can you add and please describe your background and history?
Angie replies.
Of course, yes. So we have 2 methods of sharing data with the court systems. Christy will talk in detail about what exactly we are sharing with with one entity in particular, in 2010, we began sending some information to what we call the Office of Court Administration at their request. The other mechanism, and that is through an interface where we send a file over to that entity. The other mechanism is we do have a small subset of court systems that have come to us directly and asked for information. DFPS does have a couple of counties in Texas that also provide county protective services, and they have their court system that they deal with on the county level, and they like to have some of the information from our statewide impact system. And so there's a small subset, Harris County, which is where Houston is located. That's one of the largest counties. And then we also have the Supreme Court Children's Commission, and then a family drug treatment court system that we send to. DFPS across the state, we have, I would say that we're probably really invested in developing community partnerships. And so we often engage in pilots with community partners, other state and local entities. When there's a need to share some data, we'll certainly engage in those activities with them.
Thank you. And DC, please describe the background and history of your data exchange.
Spencer replies.
Yeah, so for the District of Columbia, we're kind of in a unique situation. We're both the state and local kind of jurisdiction, so we only had one court system to work with. The other thing about it is that I think that we really needed to improve and stop the manual processes that we had in a lot of our court proceedings. So on the one hand, we definitely had an urge for workers to stop having so much manual back and forth. We only had one D.C. Superior Court to work through. We here in the district have in-house developers who are able to kind of support us in that endeavor. It was a little bit of a challenge on the court side. I think that for D.C. there was a lot of up and down in terms of how the exchange would happen. But ultimately, both parties agreed that we needed to be able to figure out a way to automate court proceedings so that workers would go down to court and have everything already there in hand.
Thank you. And Sabera, what about Alabama? Can we add something from them, please?
So I will read the response. The data exchange between Department of Human Resources and Administrative Office of Courts was initiated when DHR began designing and building the SACWA system. At the time, DHR contacted the courts and discussions commenced on the details. The MOU was developed and work began on the interface within months of beginning the SACWA system development. The contact was initiated by DHR, which is the Department of Human Resources. Both agencies were on board, although the Administrative Office of Courts was somewhat limited because of their lack of development resources. They were in the midst of hiring new developers for the system during the time this interface was being developed.
Thank you. And let's move on to question number 2. And we're going to start with DC this time. The question is, what were the primary challenges faced from the perspective of A, governance, B, technical, or C, administrative?
Spencer replies.
So for us, and this interface kind of predates most of the folks in the room, but I can tell you in terms of kind of our recent enhancements, in terms of governance, I don't think we had too much of a challenge. I think both parties agreed that the interface was definitely needed, and so there was a willingness and a commitment to make that happen. We did not have to spend a lot of time trying to argue that point. The biggest challenge really came in being more of a Rosetta Stone to each other, trying to talk through a lot of the court procedures on their end and knowing exactly what data they were looking for and exactly what they needed to do with it. We were dealing with true developers, so in a sense, they don't really know a lot about the business processes and what happens to a lot of those documents. Here again, on CFSA side, we actually had in-house developers that was able to talk through a lot of those processes. So the governance wasn't an issue. The technical was really about learning how to speak the same language, and that's that whole Rosetta Stone comment. and making sure that we understood what the triggers were, how the data was going to be sent, how it was going to be received, and then for both parties to kind of agree where the data would go and how it would be used. In terms of the change management or the administrative process, it really was trying to make sure that we had different points, that we would verify that the data was moving as smoothly as we wanted to, and being sure that we put a process in place at the beginning so we could go back and revisit any kind of issues or challenges that we had, because we were dealing with two government agencies, and there's always some miscommunication. So we had to be really clear and allow ourselves on the front end to know that we were going to walk into a process that was going to need change over time.
That's excellent, and I cannot and I wholly support the importance of the front end piece, so that both agencies understand the priorities and the processes. So thank you so very much. And Texas, is there something you can add here in terms of your primary challenges?
Angie replies.
Well, I will talk about the governance part of this, Joyce. So, like I mentioned before, DFPS partners really well with lots of community partners, and so we were approached by these different entities to share information. And a lot of times it is because, we have in some instances, there's not a lot of discussion in terms of governance because of who the request may be coming from. I think we're all familiar with that kind of scenario. But we certainly want to be helpful where we can. And so the governance aspect of this, there really wasn't a lot to discuss in terms of providing the info to the Office of Court Administration or to those local county and district courts. And, I'll let Christy talk about the technical aspect and how we got to that place. But, of course, we had what we call a memoranda of understanding between the agencies to kind of solidify the agreement. And in some instances, it truly depends on our program partner who's involved at the time when we do these types of interfaces. We have some MOUs that are very detailed in terms of what each agency will provide to each other or share, and there are some that are very high level. So that's probably one of the challenges that we have, but also from a technical standpoint, I'm sure Christy can share with us some of the challenges that she sees, and specifically with relation to the court data sharing that we do.
Yeah, and I'm actually, when I'm researching back history, it goes back beyond a little bit further back than 2010. Apparently it did start with a quick reporting need that our data warehouse at the time that was being built started pulling that data. And then the most challenges that we experienced was working through the differences between the application that was going to consume the data and the differences in our application and the interpretation of the data. And so in that interface, we have placement data, of course, the legal data, where their current legal status is, and various other pieces of information. But like, for example, when we use codes and we store codes in our application, we had to then work with the other partner to figure out if they wanted to take that code list and also use it, or actually get the actual literals, meanings. And so I think we chose the path of going down, giving them the actual literals, and then there were challenges around dates and things because we had multiple dates and they wanted one of a particular field. We worked through that. But really what's great about our relationships, as Angie mentioned, is we always have a technical contact, and so really we let program help drive the requirements, but we let the technical folks work out all of those details. And we did a lot of serious, I'm looking at a couple of years, it looks like, of iterations of improvements to where it got us from about 2008 to 2010, and we've been pretty stable since then. So the data has been, I think the only time where we have issues when we add a new value, not going with the codes list and going with the actual literals, they just get the literal and they use that for what it means, and that's better than having to provide them a constant codes list. So that was one thing I could say is it was a plus the way we implemented.
Yeah, and I would also add that we're starting to see more as we exchange more information with other state agencies and community partners, the data governance aspect of this is something that continues to come up because of the translation between the systems, and I think that's something that we'll probably touch on later as we're going through the remainder of the topics.
But technically it is a file that we actually put on their server as opposed to them coming and grabbing it from us. That's one part of the implementation that we did. And I think that's it.
Great. And Utah?
Joseph replies.
I'll start with the administrative part because it sort of leads into the other stuff on the governance and the technical. So early on, when the process first started of exchanging information, we set up this recurring meeting that increases and decreases in frequency depending on what we're doing. So that was real key for us, knowing that, that sometimes we'd be meeting monthly and all of us would be in the same room, which led really well into the governance because in that meeting we had lawyers from, both sides representing DCFS and, of course, the lawyers over at the court system, so they could speak to, as other states mentioned, this memorandum of understanding. So that all got set up with all the technical people, all the business people, and all the lawyer people, I guess, law people in the room, which really helped. And then in those same meetings is when we discussed the technical implementation. So we use web services, for example. We talk about, as others had mentioned, I'll just piggyback on what they said of what elements we're going to be exchanging, what data is interesting to both parties, what we will store in our system, which, again, I'll echo with whoever went prior to me, that we don't store a whole heck of a lot. We usually just let it flow through the interface so that we don't have to keep, synchronicity between code tables and stuff like that. The only things we do store are unique identifiers when we do exchanges, so that, and it's mostly for maintenance purposes or auditing purposes. So if we need to back find something, we have a unique identifier in both systems to be able to kind of link up the two exchanges. As far as testing, both of our environments, we have development environments and user test environments. And we just keep test data in both of those that they can link up between those common unique codes.
Great. Simplicity is good, right? Savera, go ahead. Can you please add what Alabama's challenges were, please?
I certainly can. I'm going to read the responses as provided by the state. The primary challenges faced as far as governance was concerned, the major challenge was in negotiating the kinds of information to be exchanged, as there were certain limitations based on confidentiality. B, for technical, there were some challenges in all three aspects because the Administrative Office of Courts Development resources were not at capacity. They were building this interface and also maintaining their system at the same time. C, administrative, the manager in charge of the development was also managing their current system. His time was in short supply and communication when there was an issue which was a challenge. Although a system to report issues was put in place, issues were not always addressed timely due to the volume of work the AOC developers and managers were doing at that time.
That's very interesting. It sounds like Alabama had several challenges, both administratively and technically. And I am sorry that they're not here to fully explain that, but again, I appreciate them writing responses to our questions. So let's move on to question number 3, and that is, how is data security addressed? And let's start with Utah.
Joseph replies.
So all of our interface is done with web services, and we use what's called WS security, which sits at the header level, so the entire packet is encrypted. And then we also, of course, talk over SSL, so we use the secure transport layer there. And as far as the actual operations are concerned, the individual ones on the interface, we do sort of a role-based and then a user ID just for auditing purposes, just to say this is the role from the court's perspective and who's doing it, making this request, and then vice versa from our end. This is DCFS essentially making the request, and this is the user that does it. It's validated at the role level, and then the user is more for an audit trail. And then, like I said, the rest of it is just done through all of our standard security exchange.
Great. Texas?
Angie responds.
Hello. I'm sorry. I was starting to talk, and I was on mute. I apologize.
All right.
So where are we at again? I'm sorry.
It's how is data security addressed?
Oh, okay. Yes. All right. The data security aspect of it, I'll let Christy talk to that, to those details, because she handles the technical pieces of it.
And for our for the MRS stuff, I'm not quite sure.
For data warehouse?
Yeah, the data warehouse stuff. But I know we just use secure file transfer. And like I mentioned earlier, we put the file on their server and negotiate with them as to how they want to authenticate when we get, it's a secure file transfer.
And we have a number of different other exchanges that we do outside of the court, the court information that we trade. We do have web, as the individual mentioned before, we do have web services, and then we also have an outsourced foster care provider that we're sending information back and forth from. But specific to the courts, it's been a manual process, but we anticipate that they are likely going to be coming back and asking us to probably update or upgrade the way in which we trade data with them, because I'm sure, as many of the rest of you on the call, there are several partners and several other agencies that want access to our data for lots of different reasons.
Absolutely. And Christy, what is the frequency that you update the data on their server?
We run it every night.
Every night.
Daily job. Full dump of all kids in our conservatorship. So I maybe didn't mention that as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All kids who have they're in our conservatorship.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. DC?
Spencer replies.
So I'm going to start from the program side first. So all of our batch processes are really initiated first by an approval from the worker supervisor. And then 3 times a day, we actually have a secure file transfer through a batch process where we upload all of our documents into the court system.
And the data security issues?
So data security is handled through our secure file transfer process.
Okay. Great. Sabera, can you add something from Alabama?
So I will read the response as provided by the state. All network traffic is within a private, secure network controlled by the state. It is not accessible from the public domain.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move to question number 4 then. And let's start with DC. And the question is, what are the specifics of the data exchanged?
So now I'm going to have Kamal, who actually he's our developer in-house that actually speak to some of the data specifics.
Hi, all. For DC, we are having 4 parts of exchange. We divided as hearings, court reports, court orders, and complaint forms. So for each segment, we have we send around 30 or 40 XML nodes. So our format we use is XML. So we have a matching pattern with courts and CFSA.
Are you still there?
Yeah, we are done actually.
You are done. Okay. All right, Utah, what are the specifics of the data exchanged, please?
Joseph speaks.
So for us, the information that we first, I should preface this by saying our stuff is all real time. And for us, it's more like a window into each other's system. So none of the data becomes resident and stored in the opposite system. So from us, when they look into SAFE, they get to see address information about their kid, placement information about a kid that's, dealing with the courts. Those are probably the two biggest. For us, we look at, as mentioned before, hearings, incidents with the courts, and court orders. The flow is bidirectional. The frequency is at runtime, ad hoc whenever.
Great. And Texas?
Hi, this is Christy again. Similar to the gentleman who just spoke, our data is, of course, all the demographics data about the child, their legal, as I mentioned, their legal status, their current stage of service that they're in here in Texas, and then placement data, data about their current child plan, and then their service levels that they're at. Like, I don't know if those states have that similar stuff, but it's also their service levels. How would you describe that, Angie?
Oh, it's what we call a level of care, and so it's their level of care determines the rate at which they're paid, and so
how severely, like disabled and that
right.
sort of the special needs. It also gives employee information, like who their current caseworker is, and then other stages of service that they're in, as well as merge information. So if that's one of the complications that we've experienced is dealing with when we merge people. And if there are any mergers that have occurred, it also gives that indication as well in the file.
And DFPS will merge to reduce duplicate individuals in the system. We have a function or a mechanism that allows people to merge or combine records if it's the same individual. And so, as with any process that you develop, sometimes there are errors when people are merging, and so it does become complex when you merge an error and you then have to extricate all of that data that you push together. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because that is we then have to then make sure what we're sending over to our partners is complete, because what they may have received the day before may look different today, right, because of some perhaps correction to a data record or a merge process may have occurred since the last time we sent the data.
And so, as mentioned, we do send those unique identifiers, like their person identifying information, and then in a merge situation, we would send them the closed person identifier and the forward person identifier, so they can make some decisions. And all of the decision-making is made then on their side. The court, OCA, when they receive the file, figures that out for themselves.
Oh, that's interesting. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often, right?
Well, it happens much more than we would like it to.
So they're around longer, I think, and then it stables out. So I think that's the beauty of it.
Yes. Sabera, can you add information from Alabama, please?
Yes, I can. So it seems pretty similar to what we've heard so far. The interface is bidirectional. It runs nightly, Monday to Friday. Information is initially sent to the Administrative Office of Courts when a home removal is entered into the fax system. After that, when there is information added or a change made to the client record, the information is sent. Joyce, would you like me to elaborate on the elements exchanged?
Yeah, at a high level, please.
Yeah, so from a fax to the courts, it's, they exchange county case number, client demographics, parent information, living arrangements, petition information, client attorney, social worker information, and then from courts to fax, it's the court's case number, court hearing information, juvenile probation officer name, officer phone, court order type, petitioner information. So probably that's at the high level.
Yes. And under each one of those high levels are significant subtopics. So that we can share that with you if you would like. Just let us know. Okay. So on to question number 5, and we're going to start with Texas. And I'm going to ask you, how is the data used in both systems?
Angie replies.
And unfortunately, Joyce, on this one, we are going to have to respond. Our response would be that we would need to check in with our programmatic partner to make sure that we are providing the right information about how the courts are using all of the data. So we're more than happy to provide that response after today's webinar once we reach our points of contact.
Okay, and let me explain that Texas also was hit with some bad weather, and folks from the courts and the programmatic side were unable to join us today. So, Angie, you can provide that if you would like to at some point in time.
Sure.
And can you explain how the court information is used in the Texas system?
Yeah, we have very little court information. We have the jurisdiction, or not the jurisdiction, what's it called?
It's the
cause number, court and cause. There's a couple of pieces of information that are stored with that legal status information that I mentioned earlier, but that's really it.
It's a very, very small subset of data. And our direct delivery field staff also get that information as well. But certainly, if we can have more accurate information from our partner, then that's always better.
So it's some court number and cause number. Those are the two items that I know of because we get the updates from a website actually when a new court comes on, because that doesn't happen that often. And then that's recorded along with the legal actions and legal status information in our system.
Correct. Okay, thank you. And Utah?
Joseph replies.
So for us, the biggest thing that the courts probably use is a lot of the case planning that we do with the kids, with the child clients that are involved. Probably the biggest initiative that we've had over the last couple of years is the process by which we file things with the courts relative to the cases we're working with, that we switched over to being completely electronic. So that's probably one of the biggest day-to-day things that the caseworkers do as part of their case management is they now, what the courts term e-file, all of their court planning documents and stuff that they need to have prepared for the next hearing in court. On the opposite side, that's probably the biggest thing our caseworkers get from the data in the court system is the orders that originated that we have rights to see outside of DCFS and hearings and incidents that any of the kids that they're on their current caseload have upcoming with the courts. And as far as timeliness, it's all real time. So whenever it's updated in the court system and somebody pulls it into our SAFE system, or reads, I should say, from it in the SAFE system, it's live as of when it was last updated.
Great. Thank you. And DC?
Spencer replies.
Yeah, for DC, I think our process is very much similar. I do know that we, in our exchange, we actually create PDFs which we store of all of our documents, which includes the complaints, the court orders, and the court hearings. We get both the PDF and we actually get data that we can pull into our application for workers to use. The main thing is that all of the information from the court is sent to the workers and they have access to read it. One of the biggest attributes is really keeping up with the dates. So all the hearing dates pull into the actual calendar of the worker. The court orders we actually use in part in making our FOIA determination. And outside of that, I think the court is just using us to keep, it's just keeping the information so that we both have the most recent status of what's going on with the kids.
Okay. And Sabera, Alabama?
The response is provided by the state. Department of Human Resources uses the information for case management. We generally use court information, whether it is entered or comes via the interface on reports. Timeliness is an issue for both systems. PACS users don't always get information entered timely, which means the information is not sent timely. The same issue is present for both administrative office of courts. The court clerks in each county are responsible for entering the data into the AOC system, and this information is not always entered timely. Thus, it doesn't come to fact timely.
So from Alabama's perspective, timeliness of the data is obviously an issue and a challenge. And so moving on then to question number 6, what are your current and future data exchange efforts and plans? And let's start with the District of Columbia, please.
So with the new CWIS regs coming out, I think we're looking at an opportunity to expand our relationship with the court and really improve our exchange. We will continue to get the court hearings, the court reports, and the complaint forms. Ironically, at one point early in the process, we actually were doing case plans, but some issues on the court side arose, and we had to terminate that exchange. So we're definitely going to revisit that. I think that in hearing from the court, they actually are no longer going to accept hand-delivered case plans from the workers anymore, so we have to automate that. The other benefit is that we're also going to be reaching out to child support so that we can actually get that income data on the kids and build an exchange with them, and it's all in the same building.
Wow. Lots to do, huh?
Yes.
So, Texas, what are your current and future data exchange efforts and plans?
Well,
Angie.
Also, currently we're evaluating CWIS to determine how, number one, whether or not we're going to declare, but that certainly lends itself to opening up several exchanges with several entities. But outside of CWIS, DFPS is also in the process, was in the process of planning to exchange data with multiple entities. Some of you may be aware that DFPS is outsourcing some of its foster care functions, and in order to allow the outsourced provider to be able to have information about the children that we have in our care, it's required that we have to share as much information with them as possible. Not all of those outsourced providers have the same types of system, or their systems may not have the same capabilities or the same types of data in their respective systems. So with that on the horizon for the agency in general for foster care, we know that regardless of our CWIS decision, that we will have to develop some type of uniform exchange for cost containment purposes. And figure out how to do this in the most flexible, most cost-effective way that we can do this. And so one of the bigger challenges that we see is the data governance around all of the data that will be shared back and forth. Because again, as I mentioned, anybody that we're sharing data with, they certainly don't have the same system set up that you would, and so we're also internally talking and having discussions about setting up a data governance council. And in fact, in our last legislative session, that was one of the bills that was drafted, was that DFPS was to create this data governance council. But that requirement was removed along the way during the various iterations of that particular bill. However, because of the outsourcing of the foster care, the agency does see a need to continue on without any, although there may not be the mandate in place, we do see it as a need because, again, we want to be sending good data back and forth, and CWIS rules are going to also require that data quality aspect of it.
That is certainly a perspective from the global data exchange efforts. Is there anything specific to the courts interface that you are going to do in the future?
Well, like as Christy mentioned before, it's been pretty stable. They've not really inquired about expanding. Actually, I take that back. We did have a bill this past legislative session that actually expanded on the amount of data that we would be sending in terms of the children that had been or had not been in our care previously. We're examining that right now to determine how we can achieve that, and the program side has been in discussions with the court systems. The other bill requirement that we have from our last legislative session is around also sharing information potentially with the adult, I want to say Texas criminal justice system and the court systems for the criminal justice system here in Texas. They also want to have an awareness of whether or not there are any adults that are about to be or currently incarcerated who have had any history within our agency as a child or, perhaps within a family that we served at some point. We do anticipate that the court systems, whether that be the Children's Court Commission or the Office of Court Administration, we do anticipate that they will be coming back and asking us to provide and expand more and more data, especially as we go down this path with exchanging data with other entities, specifically the outsourced provider.
And we did have one meeting a couple of years back that we talked about exchanging a lot of those court appointments and the documents and all that. And I think the biggest challenge with that is just the technology, and that doing that with all the different county courts is just a challenge. And so we either have to develop some sort of central repository place, which requires it's just technically limiting.
Right, and that also stems from a need that originated from some of our caseworkers, because they certainly have a challenge trying to continue to keep up with typing up the court reports and sending them through the right, individual for the right court and the right county, because, sometimes we have families that cross or sit on boundaries of multiple counties. So that was a need expressed to our IT division to eliminate some of the paperwork for the caseworker.
Continuing challenges. Utah. Future data exchange efforts.
Joseph.
So probably our biggest ones that are coming up, I'm hopefully in this calendar year, one of the aspects of case management that we don't currently send that the courts have expressed interest in getting is what we just call our activity logs, which is just narrative notes that the caseworker will do when they go as part of their case management. And we're hoping to get to provide that to the court so that the judges or whoever can see it's just part of case planning, just what's going on relative to helping the kid. In terms of what the biggest thing that that we're trying to get from the courts that our workers ask for is what we call the court calendar, which is a way of presenting the data of when kids that are on the caseworker's caseload are supposed to appear in court and when their hearings are, and if it changes, that they can get notified quicker. So we're trying to get some of that information from the courts and present it at a high level in our system so that caseworkers know where they need to be. And the biggest thing is if something changes, so that, if it was going to be a judge in one county, now it's a judge in a different county, a different court building, they know before they get to the place they shouldn't be.
Dana responds.
That's nice for us.
Well, there's one other thing.
There's one other one. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, we're also doing an expansion of our documents piece with them. So historically, our DCFS workers were looking at court orders, and they only had access to official orders after the hearing, and sometimes the timeliness of receiving that was an issue, or they were looking for extra information. And courts structure their documents based on a lot more rules than family services have. They have some limitations on timelines and when you can receive certain information, all of that extra stuff. So we had to coordinate with them to make sure that we were able to see all of the documents that we were privy to and at the appropriate time. So we're working on that interface hopefully within the first quarter of this year.
Great. Sabera, can you add the information from Alabama, please?
Right. I will read the response. Currently, we are sending some data to AOC, which is the Administrative Office of Courts, in the form of a query that was not included in the original interface. We would like to make changes to the current interface to include this. At the time we have the discussion with AOC, we will be looking at all changes, additions to the interface that would benefit each agency.
Thank you. So moving on to question number 7. Starting with Utah, what were and are key lessons learned that you would like to share with other states?
So from the non-technical side, the biggest thing that we learned was as I mentioned earlier on in the roundtable, was just that setting up a regular meeting to discuss this with all the right people in the room, right in quotes, whether that needs to be all, whoever from the technical side, whoever from the business side, lawyers, project managers, and obviously we have the benefit of being able to do it in one room, but a conference call or just some level of being able to communicate on a regular basis, and not through chains of emails and stuff like that. Literally just being in a place where you're all communicating. That's probably the biggest thing from the non-technical side. From the technical side, a couple other states mentioned this earlier, but deciding what elements will be stored, how we're going to link them back. I think whichever states brought up the merge process, that's a big one for us too, obviously, just deciding how we're going to handle that. As a slightly more specific example, something that happens here with the way that the courts store their unique identifiers versus the way we do, when a kid is adopted in the system, they typically get, it's sort of like a merge, but not really. Like there's a new person, but it started from another person, which sounds terrible, but if you think about it in terms of data, it makes a lot of sense. So being able to handle those outliers or maintenance things and how they become resident in both systems, so that if we update something that's a unique identifier for the courts, we make sure to tell them or have a process for communicating that change to them. That's about it, though, for us.
Okay. The district, what are your key lessons that you'd like to share?
I think in agreement, the number one thing for us is to always make sure that you understand how your program, your agency, and your front-end user are really going to use the data. I think you've got to start from that place initially. The whole thing about exchanging data back and forth becomes relatively easy, but you want to make sure that you're solving the right problem and you're meeting the right need. To that end, I would also say, our theme around here is to measure twice and cut once. So being able to have those conversations on a regular basis to really understand how the data is going to be interpreted. We use different terminology back and forth between the two agencies. So you really have to take the time necessary to make sure that you are speaking the same language. You really need to understand the development capacity of your partner. We were fortunate enough to have a set of developers through D.C. Superior Court where, we could actually have those conversations and figure out how to make their kind of antiquated system produce and receive the same information that we needed. Determine how you want to handle the data errors. I know we've put a number of things in place. We actually have an email notification that runs out daily around how many things that we've sent or received from the court. But you have to think about things that are very, very simple. One of the things that I know recently that we've been dealing with is just the names of judges and how frequently they change. And being able to have that in your application and being able to update that and send that information back and forth to the court to make sure that it's accurate is important. Duplicate clients, we have a pretty sophisticated merge capacity, but what does that mean in terms of you've got 2 or 3 versions of a client in your application? How do you ensure that the court is dealing with the right one? And I think lastly is being able to kind of forecast any changes within your child welfare system. I've been here just under 6 years, and I think that we've taken on revising the case plan at least twice, and we may be headed for a third. So how do you make sure that you can at least think down the road and figure out what your exchange is going to look like, not just today but tomorrow? I think the combination of those things is what I would advise any jurisdiction to do if they're looking to build or enhance any data exchange, particularly with the court system.
Let me ask you, do you have court participants participate in your change management group?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, we at its height, I think, even now, we were having pretty regular conference calls. We had some in-house with the developers and court personnel, and then we had regular weekly meetings with them to decide, just kind of keep a status as to where we were going and talking about individual processes in great detail to make sure that everybody's needs were met. But, yeah, definitely could not have done it without court involvement.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that response. And Texas, What are your key lessons learned that you would like to share with your colleagues?
Well, I would say ditto to the past two people that spoke, because a lot of what they were saying is that we've experienced, and I would agree with all of those points. I think what Texas has done a little bit differently than others is we've used less of the data in our system, so we don't have to keep up with so much of it. We rely on the caseworkers to take the court and cause numbers down, and that's really a limit. We limit what we're storing and having to keep accurate with other systems' data. We're really moving towards sharing more data more live than having so many data exchanges. Of course, we have a lot of limits with that, so we can't do that. But anyway, I think to the point of the agreements between the agencies and how we work together could be improved. As we have a memorandum of understanding, a document that's kind of, how are we going to work together? But I don't think that's visited enough and revisited when we do have changes to our system as a part of, like what you mentioned, with change control. So although we've been very stable with what we have, I think the more interfacing we do, more back and forth exchanges we do, we're going to have more issues with that type of thing. But I do agree also with understanding how they're using. We don't have a clear understanding, I don't believe, of how the courts use our data that we send over there. I'm kind of wondering if they use it. But I'm sure they do, or we would have heard about it. But I think allowing enough time to develop a good system and test it back and forth is probably the one thing I see from historical changes that we've had to do those first couple of years. If we would have spent more time maybe working out some of those kinks ahead of time, and we do a lot more of that now, more planning, more documenting of design, requirements. We're making great improvements on our side of here, the DFPS IT, to gather requirements ahead of time and really make sure we've got that down and agreed upon before we move forward in the development process. So I think we've learned those lessons over the years. Would you agree, Angie, that we need to do that? Because what ends up happening is you start developing something, and then the requirements change, or somebody thinks of something new or different. And so if we don't get that really nailed down from the front, we end up taking a lot longer to get it right. Anything else you want to add, Angie?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay. That's it.
Excellent. Sabera, can you add information from Alabama, please?
So, Joyce, these don't seem to be key lessons. They seem more like recommendations, questions to ask before maybe working on a data exchange. So I'm going to read the response that we have.
Absolutely.
It starts. I would recommend they ask themselves these questions. What will you want to use the information for? What data measures will be affected? Will the information be added directly to the system? If it is added, how will users be able to identify the information that came over as opposed to information that was added by the user? Should users be able to make changes to the information that came via the interface? Do reports need to be created from the information to identify discrepancies, errors, or provide the information sent that cannot be added to the system? If there are, make that part of the initial development. Other recommendations. If you think you may need particular information in the future, go ahead and plan to send it or receive it. Listen to the counterpart and try to give them as much as possible. Find ways to get any information they will provide into the system, or at least into a report so that it is readily available. We have some limits in getting juvenile, probation officer, and guardian ad litem information into our system because the system doesn't create clients or collaterals. Because of this, we're not getting this information enough to really be of benefit. That's all I have.
That was a lot. And I want to thank our participants because you have presented a lot of key lessons learned that will be a benefit to our colleagues who are attending this webinar. And that actually concludes the discussion portion of the roundtable. So if we could have the next slide, please.
Joyce, this is David. We have some questions that were submitted over the chat. If you want me to read those now.
Yes, please. David Baker is going to run the Q&A session. David?
Okay. I'm sorry if you were going to put up another slide for that, but I just wanted to make sure I got through these. And I just want to remind folks, if they have additional questions, they can type them into the questions that you can find in the control panel on the right of your screen. If you don't see it, there should be an orange arrow at the top that you can use to expand it. Our first question for all the panelists was, has anyone faced a situation where the court records reporting system did not provide any exchange capability, and then the state had to resort to screen scraping technology?
Utah, DC, Texas?
So we never needed to resort to screen scraping where it was transmitted back through, but there are a few key program administrators, both at the state office and spread throughout the regions of Utah, that have direct access to the court system called CARE. So there's a handful of people that can log in for some reason to provide support if for some reason the data isn't coming back through the SAFE system, but not screen scrapes. They'll still just directly log in to the court system. And then that governance is handled, of course, by, contract like fair use. They have to sign a sheet saying that they know they're getting into the system, so we audit it that way.
Yeah, this is District of Columbia. No, we've never had to do that. Like I said, fortunately, the court initiated at least the interface with us, and so they had a small number of development resources that they could at least commit to this. And here again, I just think that it made it easier on their end as well. So they came to the table committed, and we've been able to grow it over time. But no, we've never really dealt with a jurisdiction that did not have any type of development resource.
And that would be the same for Texas. I don't think we've come across that challenge before.
Okay, thank you. This is David. I also want to remind folks that as the slide says, you may also press *1 on your phone to access the operator's assistance to speak to the group. And we'll check in with the operator now and again to see if there are any calls in the queue. The next question that was submitted is, did any of the states use NIEM, the National Information Exchange Model, to implement their interoperability? If not, why was it not considered? Utah?
So we don't, and as to the why, I would assume it just was not on anyone's radar to being used on either side at the time.
And this is Texas, so when we, like Christy mentioned before, we were 2008 time frame, and so again, yeah, that probably wasn't on our radar either to consider. That may not even have been in existence at that time, and you guys can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, that not an item for us.
DC, do you have anything to add?
Sure, yeah, I was just about to weigh in. Here again, just like the others, I think it predates. Yes. Our interface predates NIEM, so we started our initial interface around 2008 or 9? 2003, I'm sorry. So I think NIEM was a baby, if not anything else.
Thank you, all three. Operator, I just wanted to check to see if there are any calls in the queue.
No, there are no questions in the queue at this time.
Thank you, Operator. Would the states or the district be willing to share the MOUs that they have developed? Texas?
We are certainly more than willing to go back to our program partners to access the most recent copy and discuss that with them.
District of Columbia, how much? No, we would be more than happy to share any kind of MOU document that we had with any other jurisdiction.
Yeah, for Utah, the same thing. We can look at just sending a template of how we fill ours out or the structure that we give it to give to the courts.
So let me interject here. We are going to come up to a slide that has our state participants' emails. So if you want to request those MOUs directly from the state, you can use the emails that you will soon see. David?
Thank you. Next question. Did anyone face an issue where an individual judge would not cooperate? Or does the court agency take care of that kind of objection or reluctance to participating in data sharing? DC?
No, I mean, not to my knowledge. I mean, we can have some pretty hard-hitted judges, but I don't think we faced any opposition at that point.
Okay, thank you.
This is Texas. I don't think we've come across that specific scenario. We've had some other very interesting ones, but not that one. Interesting one.
So for Utah, from our perspective, it's definitely not filtered back to us, at least the Division of Child and Family Services. So either the courts are handling that internally, or it's not happening, which is my guess. I mean, it's not to say the judges don't certainly request features that impact both sides, but I have not been privy to any out-and-out objection or opposition to anything.
Okay, thank you. The next question to all three again. How many court vendors are you engaging? Utah?
For Utah, just one.
Okay, thank you. Texas?
For Texas, none. We're working directly with the court itself.
Okay, and then DC?
Got it. Yeah, just one for us as well.
Okay, thank you. Operator, are there any questions in the queue?
No, there are no questions in the queue.
Thank you. This next one is specifically for Utah. It sounds like your exchange occurs in real time, but data is not transferred or stored in your system. Do you expect this exchange to be CWIS compliant, or are you making changes to address CWIS compliance?
So we'll be adding additional features depending on our declaration of CWIS, and it will be mostly related to any of the data quality planning or any of the reporting that we'll need. But we'll just address those as it comes up relative to the interface.
Okay, thank you. This next question is addressed to Texas. Is your data exchange unidirectional? If not, what information do you receive back from your court partners?
Yes, we're only sharing the data with our Office of Court Administration. We're not receiving anything from them. The only thing that we do is that we use information out on the Internet to grab down the new courts, and we add those to our system through a operational process.
Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. Did that answer the question?
Yes, you did. Thank you. The next question is for DC. Does the calendar integrate with Outlook for upcoming hearings?
So we wrap all of our calendar stuff in a JavaScript framework that we use called Full Calendar. It's in our web application. So we get the data back from the courts and then rejigger the data and do some filtering and some formatting to put it in a format that's acceptable for that. So no, it is not integrated with their other calendars. It's basically, you can only see that calendar inside of the SAFE system.
Right. And the same with DC. Our calendar is actually within the application, so we have not at any point in time pulled that to the Outlook calendar.
Okay, thank you, DC. Texas, this is a follow-up to the question about reluctance about participating in data sharing. You made a reference to interesting issues. Is this something you can elaborate on?
Oh, well, I think when I made that reference, we certainly have some judges in our areas who like to, I mean, we've had many instances where judges may order us to do something with our system. Some of you may or may not be aware of the federal court ruling that we're currently going through right now. And so that's just one example. Certainly we've had some judges in other jurisdictions that would like for DFPS to do many other things for them or engage in some some other data sharing as opposed to being resistant to sharing. But again, like we have judges that will approach our agency leadership or the regional leadership to talk about those kinds of things and developing pilots. Bexar County is one where the courts, Judge Sakai and Bexar County has been very willing to come and talk with regional leadership about things that he wants to explore for his court system. One of those things had to do with a type of filing system for some of the court reports, and that was specific just to that county. But we have quite the opposite, where we, in fact, may have judges, trying to wanting us to be a little bit more engaged and do some more work that the system clearly may not be capable of doing at the time. And so, we just have to talk those things through with our agency leadership, our general counsel, and, kind of get to what the root of the issue may be in instances where judges really want us to do more or provide more and in a particular way.
Thank you. Another question. Can you speak to how confidentiality issues have been resolved, meaning in what the courts can have access to in the child welfare systems, what child welfare data courts may have access to? Utah?
So that's all wrapped up inside of our memorandum of understanding. The specific, what specific documents and what part the parties are privy to see relative to that.
Okay, thank you. DC?
Yeah, same here. It's in a MOU. Other than our court monitors, we don't allow child welfare information to be exchanged or actually to be accessible.
And Texas?
Yeah, it's covered in our MOU as well. We do have PII data and Social Security data, but that is covered in the MOU.
But I will say that we do have a function within our case management system that allows the court-appointed special advocates, the advocates for children and families when they go to court. We have built a special type of view for those particular individuals, so they certainly can take any information that we've allowed them to view from our system.
We're delivering it to them now.
So
we are actually doing data. We just recently built a true data exchange with them.
With CASA, our CASA entity. And so they can certainly take anything into that courtroom that they would like to share, regardless of whether or not there may be some confidential or sensitive data that they should perhaps rethink about sharing.
But that data was passed through legal as well, so I think we're covered there, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know, because of that mention of confidentiality information and details about how it works being in the MOU, there's even more interest in seeing MOUs. So as Joyce had mentioned, there will be a slide up shortly that will show people how to contact the participants. Operator, are there any questions in the queue?
There are no participants in the queue at this time.
Thank you very much. Joyce, that's all the questions we have in the chat right now, so I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for running the Q&A session, and I want to compliment our participants for the great discussion. And roundtables, audio only, are very impersonal, so your dialogue has been excellent, and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our attendees do also. So let's move to the next slide, please. So once again, I want to thank you, a shout out to our panelists, and as stated previously, if you'd like to contact them directly, their contact info is listed, and this PowerPoint is available for you, so you will have their email addresses.
Email addresses for participants are as follows. For Alabama, Tim Prescott, email tim.prescott Holly Christian, email hollykristian@dhr.alabama.gov. Donna Reardon, email donna.reardon@dhr.alabama.gov. Danny Luster, email danny.luster@dhr.alabama.gov. John James, email john.james@alabama.gov. For the District of Columbia, David Elgis, email david.elges@dc.gov. Spencer Wilder, email spencer.wilder@dc.gov. Kamal Devabhakhtuni, email kamal.devabhakhtuni@dc.gov. For the State of Texas, Angelita Lindeman, email angelita.lindemann@dfps.state.tx.us. Christy Mitschke, email christie.mitschke@dfps.state.tx.us. For the State of Utah, Dana Rickert, email drickert@utah.gov. Joseph Listello, email jlistell@utah.gov.
Next slide, please. So this portion of the webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, a message will be sent announcing availability on the Children's Bureau website. Once again, a huge thank you to our panelists. And as we move forward with the series, the confirmed upcoming event is on February 14th. We are doing a webinar which will showcase state genogram or family relationship diagram functionality in systems from Indiana and Ohio. So thank you for attending, and that ends the roundtable discussion. I would now like to turn the stage over to Mr. Terry Watt. Terry?
Thanks, Joyce. Well done again. And to our state partners here, I want to echo what Joyce said. Good information. Thank you very much. We encourage all states to explore what's feasible and useful within their environment and push the envelope so that we can get good data exchanges that will really help you improve the outcomes for kids and families, as well as reduce the amount of data entry that staff need to do, both on the court side as well as the state child welfare worker side. So thank you all. I want to suggest maybe, David, if you could reach out to our state counterparts and ask them to share what MOUs they have so they don't have to respond to 15, 25 different states asking for that MOU, and just if they would just send us what they have available and are willing to share, we'll package it, give a contact note if necessary, and send it out to our listserv. That might save everybody a little time responding to multiple emails. So if we could do that, hopefully it'll save some time for everybody concerned.